So craniosacral therapy works with the craniosacral system. So this system's made up of the cerebral spinal fluid, which is produced by the brain, and this fluid flows within and around the structures of the brain and then also down along the spinal cord. And it gives the brain and the spinal cord protection, it provides nourishment, and helps to remove waste products. So the layers of tissue that surround the cerebral spinal fluid are also part of that craniosacral system. And it's through some of those firm attachments of these layers to the bones within the skull, and then also a couple spots on the upper spine and down at the sacrum, where we're able to feel for restrictions in those tissues that might affect the craniosacral rhythm. And then we're also able to treat the system through the movement of those bones. So I've highlighted these layers of tissue. These are called meningeal tissues in green here. So there's 3 layers to this. So we'll highlight the innermost layer here first. So I just highlighted the innermost layer of that tissue, and this is the pia mater, and it is connected directly to the brain tissue, and in the spinal canal it's connected directly to the spinal cord. So that's the innermost layer. Up above that, so there's a space, and then the next meningeal layer of tissue is the arachnoid mater. So we can see that highlighted in green right there. And then that space in between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater is called the subarachnoid space. And this is where the cerebral spinal fluid flows. And outside of those 2 layers, we have the outermost layer, which is called the dura mater. So in the cranium, in the skull, there's 2 layers of this dura mater. So there's the meningeal layer, which is highlighted in green. And then we have the periosteal layer that's highlighted in green right here. And it's the periosteal layer that is firmly attached to the cranial bones. So right above this green layer here, this lighter kind of white beige color is one of the skull bones. So those meningeal layers of tissue exit the cranium. You can see where it's highlighted in green here. Comes out of that foramen magnum and then continues down the vertebral canal and surrounds the spinal cord. So this is just showing that outer meningeal layer of the dura mater as it surrounds the brain and the spinal cord here. So just like other systems in our body, the craniosacral system has an inherent rhythm to it. So you could think of it like your heartbeat, where there's a rhythm that's always going on, your heart is always beating, same with your breathing. And those rhythms are going on whether we're consciously aware of them or not. And the same's true with the craniosacral system. So one of the differences in that is it's much more subtle. So where it might be a little bit easier to find your heart rate, maybe at your wrist or on the side of your neck, or to actually slow down and count your breathing, it's a little harder to feel that craniosacral rhythm, but it's there, and it's a skill that we can learn and use for assessment and treatment. So in assessing the craniosacral rhythm, we can get an idea of the health and well-being of the client, but you can also get an idea of where there may be restrictions along this system, and then using that knowledge, you can provide treatment. So we can't feel the craniosacral rhythm expressed everywhere in the body. So even out on the limbs, through the torso, and we can provide treatment in those areas too. But some of the foundational areas that we really tune in and listen for are at the head and then down along the spine to the sacrum. So at the cranium, here's a head model. There are several different bones that make up our skull. So each of these different collars represents a different cranial bone. And you can see, I think it's pretty cool, you can see how they all come together on the inner part of the skull too. So each of these bones has its own unique movement and rhythm pattern. So just very generally, grossly speaking, for what that movement feels like, within the craniosacral rhythm, there's a phase where we call flexion phase and then an extension phase. And so during the flexion phase, you would generally feel the cranium, everything within it, widening just a bit. And then during extension, you would feel it narrow a bit. And these are very subtle movements, so even this and that movement are exaggerations, but you can really learn those skills and tune into that subtle movement. So another area that we'll assess is movement along the spine and at the sacrum. So I've got a sacrum right here. This is the tailbone on the sacrum, so most people know where that is located. But your sacrum sits at the very bottom of your lower back, and on each side you have the pelvic bones here. So the sacrum sits right in between those pelvic bones on your back. This is an occipital bone. So this is the same bone as you see on the bottom of the cranium here. It's just isolated from the rest. So you can see how those match up. So from the outside, the bottom of the occiput, we have the dural tube connection. So I mentioned that dura mater earlier. It forms the outer tube that contains that cerebral spinal fluid and other structures, including the spinal cord. So it has very strong attachments to the bone around this opening. So this opening is the foramen magnum. This is where your brainstem exits the skull and continues down as your spinal cord. So just imagine this is actually all around the outside of this circle here, just a little smaller dura mater for demonstration purposes. So that attaches from the outer part of the foramen magnum, goes all the way down along the spinal cord, inside the bones, inside the vertebrae, and then it attaches down at the sacrum. Okay. So when we're assessing the craniosacral rhythm, we can also feel movements up at the occiput and the cranium, and the sacrum itself also has its own unique movement pattern that we can assess and evaluate. So during that evaluation, we'll feel for how well is the rhythm flowing. Does it feel symmetrical side to side? Are there any restrictions we feel either along the spine or among any of the cranial bones or at the sacrum? And then we'll use treatment techniques to work with those and improve the craniosacral rhythm in those areas. Okay, so that's kind of a general picture of what we're feeling for and assessing during the craniosacral therapy sessions.